what we've got. So today I'm going to introduce our panelist, Cal. Man, Cal almost needs no introduction. When I think of Cal, I think of one of the true OGs. He's one of the guys who really just started the movement. And if you don't think he did, he's definitely one of the guys who's connecting everybody. So, I mean, Cal, you've been one of the guys that has not only spearheaded the movement, but has been instrumental in its progress. So please tell us more.
Chad, you're amazing. I am just so thrilled to see the Construction Progress Coalition continue your leadership in this space. Brent Darnell was truly the originator. We've learned that now. I am amazed that I didn't know Brent when I was struggling to get this rooted even before I met Sally Spencer Thomas. So Brent was doing his emotional intelligence starting in 2000. I had moved to Chicago, or from Chicago to the Northeast, and post 9/11 saw contractors struggling with mental health. Post Hurricane Katrina, seeing the effects of the destruction and the devastation and the human toll, I was doing human capital risk management, mostly through that Construction Financial Management Association, and then partnering with Bob Vandepaul, who partnered with Sally when the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention formed in 2010. And I couldn't believe how far advanced Sally was in what she was doing, and recognizing that our industry had a lot of that pain. And so Sally and I began our collaboration, and then I went to work for a contractor in 2014, and Sally and I decided to formally launch a mental health and suicide prevention campaign. I was afraid to share lived experience. Sally kept saying, Cal, what we need is a really bold leader. And in my head, I kept saying, if I share my lived experience, we're never going to get to first base. And so I did not, and sadly, I lost a dear friend along the way in 2015. And that was the game changer, Chad. I said, I'm declaring war on suicide. And Sally, you saw I had been a gentle spirit waiting for people to be ready, but that was it. I think my exact line was, if you're going to take one of the good guys, next time you go through me, game on. Let's go. And Sally, we didn't look back. And Sally was the person putting wind in my sails, Chad. I didn't have a fear. I didn't give a crap, right, Sally? To be blunt, it was a different game. Too many people slipping through the cracks. And then I just want to quickly say what your group has done has brought connectivity throughout our industry. Your courage in tackling this topic, I'm never going to forget meeting Nathan and you and all your cohorts. This group is one of the most amazing in our industry. And remember last year when we did that recap and we had so many people sharing lived experience in so many different dimensions. That recording, folks, is one for the ages. And there's so many leaders in this room right now. I'm going to be quiet, but thank you for your leadership and all that you're bringing enlightenment to this topic.
That's an overwhelming statement, Cal, and I think you're not giving yourself enough credit. I am very happy to be a part of this group, and I appreciate the accolades. But I got to say, a lot of the motivation is from people like yourself and everybody that stepped up. Otherwise, I think motivation would have been hard to maintain, especially with what we went through. So, and I was going to introduce Brent next, but I'm going to save you. I'm going to go right to Sally because from what you just said about lived experiences, man, our guest of honor today is Dr. Sally Spencer Thomas. And the reason why I call her a guest of honor, you just heard from Cal, everyone, about their connection and how we got here. But to get more technical, she brings probably the widest spectrum of perspectives, or a wide spectrum of perspectives to this movement, because she's a faculty member, avid researcher, a clinical psychologist, and tagging on to Cal's comments on lived experiences, she is a suicide loss survivor. And for Cal and Sally, everybody on this call, I think we do have to give the utmost respect to people who take traumatic scenarios and live up to the responsibility of using that trauma to help others. So, Sally, thank you very much. And please say more about yourself here.
Sure. Thanks, Chad. It's really an honor to be here. I'm new to this group. I'm new to this movement, but Cal's told me about the energy and the impact that comes from these conversations. So I'm just thrilled to be here to learn more. So I'm a psychologist by training, and I had been in the field of mental health about 16 years when my younger brother, only sibling, died by suicide in 2004. And I know many people have these before and after moments in their life where this was my life before this thing happened, and then this was my life after this thing happened. And in the acute grief that followed, there just was just a strong sense like you got to do something, which happens after tragedy. You got to figure something out here. I've been in education a really long time, but there was so much that I didn't know about suicide despite all that. And one of the things that I learned in the aftermath of my brother's death was that the majority of people who died by suicide were male. Most of them had one attempt. Most of them, that one attempt was fatal. And most of the people who died most of the men who died never stepped foot in any kind of mental health services. So literally the highest risk group was just falling through the cracks. And that's when the workplace became the viable system that we needed to put into place here. But they were very frightened in the early days of taking something on like suicide or mental health emergencies. So when I had the incredible honor and privilege to link arms with Cal, he set forth a vision that made it possible. And he also understood change management in ways that I didn't. So we were really good partners for each other. And when he said we're going to war, like he had a game plan for that war, and it worked. And one of the things we had to do early on was create something that the construction industry could grab onto. So literally Cal, me, a couple other people, we cobbled together a blueprint. And I look back on that blueprint, Cal, it was like 20 pages, a couple of typos, but it was a thing, it was a thing that people could say, like, we need to pay attention. And then to Cal's brilliance, he said, okay, we're going to fan the flames on this thing and get people to talk about it. And he had a tremendous number of media contacts, and he strategically positioned them to compete against each other. I was like, brilliant. Whenever I talk about, change and tipping point stuff, Malcolm Gladwell's book, Cal has all three. He's the connector, he's the maven, he's the salesperson, all bundled up into one amazing Energizer bunny. So we were incredible partners in that early inflection of getting this on the radar. And today I see, for the most part, this issue's on the radar, and now we're looking more for skills and strategy. So that's kind of an exciting place to be.
Amazing, man. You guys are giving me some good segues here, skills and strategies. That's exactly like listening to you and how it evolved at the macro in that whole segment, which, spans well over a decade. That's almost what we went through in the last year and a bit. We just kind of started with high level, and now we're getting to the tactical level, which brings me now to the man. I call Brent Darnell. I see him as the key master. He's like the man of measurement. So as Cal said, one of the true OGs and the man of measurement. So that's, and we all, I sincerely believe that the methods of measurement that are embraced in AEC over the next decade will have fingerprints from Brent Darnell. So please say more there, Brent.
Oh, well, I'm just honored to be part of this. CPC, Nathan, Chad, you guys are awesome. You're really talking about the things that need to be talked about that nobody else seems to be talking about. So kudos to you guys first. Cal and Sally, what can you say? They're doing all the heavy lifting here for stuff to really move this forward. And I told Cal when I met him up in New York for the first time that I was so happy that he was here, that I was no longer the voice crying in the wilderness, right? So it seems like, and this emotional intelligence work quickly morphed into performance, mental, physical, and emotional performance. That's what everything's about. And then it was a natural little glom on to mental health, mental wellness, because everything works together. So we've created stuff that incorporates everything: mind, body, spirit, everything that you are as a human being is working together to create the highest levels of performance and happiness and fulfillment and everything in your life. And Cal and Sally have lived it, and they're really out there. You can see the sincerity and the passion in them when they speak. It's just awesome to be a part of it. So I'm glad to be here.
You hit the nail on the head. It's that authenticity that comes out with everyone that I think it's been part of what has been so captivating outside of the content itself. Definitely think we could all agree with that. Nathan always bugs me that I don't introduce myself. So for those that don't know, I'm Chad Pearson. I work for Plexxis Software. We're a tech company, and that's how I got involved with Construction Progress Coalition. But I came from law enforcement, and I've had a 40-year career in the combat arts. And I teach a course on the side on performance under pressure, and that's how I kind of got involved in moderating the mental health. The mental health roundtables was because of the training that I've had with crisis, the background that I've had with my formal training in crisis resolution and the practical experiences that I've had as a police officer, and then the course that I teach on performance under chaos and critical stress. So that's me, everybody. And so on that note, it was said probably 3 times in this conversation about how everything works together, and that's where we're really starting off. And Cal, I would like to start off with you on this, because one of the things that has happened, that hasn't happened, is that the industry, despite all of the efforts from you, Sally, and everybody else, and the CPC and everything that we've been doing, AEC is still keeping physical health and our mental well-being completely segregated. And they're looking at it from 2 separate things, when the reality is that they are one. There's a brain-body relationship that works together, and it should be seen as being together, which is what we're trying to both dig into today, understand how to measure it, and what tactics to come into, tactics to use to help people execute. So I guess my first comment and question to you is, let's just start digging into why we've got to look at safety as being beyond the physical. You used a term in a meeting last week, and I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, beyond physical safety.
Beyond physical safety, that's it. Yeah.
So much emphasis on that physical side. We're very heavily regulated, right? With OSHA regulations, either state or federal. And there's need for those regulations, and they're valuable. They provide a framework, but it's compliance. It wasn't culture. And we were unfortunately steeped in that enforcement mindset, not the coaching mindset. But there's been so much evolution. I go back to when I went to work for the contractor. I was bringing occupational health back to safety and health. My first forays were not, let's talk about mental health and suicide prevention. I was working with a paving contractor. My first foray was teaching people about hearing loss. Are you aware that 60% of employees lose their hearing? It was an educational approach. And then could we equip people with that new knowledge and empower them to protect their hearing? The early signs of progress were employees telling me that their kids were wearing hearing protection in the off season when they were ATVing or doing firewood or at the hunting range. And I saw that gentle progress being made, and I was like, yes. So I got there in the fall, hearing, hydration, and then heat-related illness for the next spring. I was planting the seeds that we needed to teach about nutrition and power napping and deep breathing. By the time we talked about mental health, people were like, dude, you had a setup 6 months ago. And it was just having that strategy. And Sally and I used to talk about, we have to play chess when others are playing checkers. And that was a great analogy. So we had to be a couple steps ahead. And one thing, Sally, that helped is when we were given some publication opportunities. When we got the calendar invitation to go out a year, and then 2 years, then 3 years from construction executive, we had to think about, where are we trying to steer this movement next? Who are going to be authors that are ready? We were always deliberate about wanting to build an army of helpers. We knew that had to be done. So Sally, very deliberate, more authors, more speakers, right? More tools in the tool chest. That helped us when someone accepted my pitch. Let's do a 3-year series of articles. Because then we could talk about health, we could talk about employee benefits, we could talk about barriers to care, access. In time, we actually got to disparities that were gender, race, geographic, age, and others. So we covered this broad spectrum. The powerful thing that I think has happened is National Safety Week, 2 years in a row, has covered this topic. So Charlie Bacon with Limbach, he's the CEO. He's a strong leader, one of my favorite people in this industry. I met him in 2004. I asked him to be an early adopter. He brought me to his peer group around 2016 or 17, but he was one of the originators of National Safety Week. And he continues to talk to his peers about the importance of this topic. And there are others. Ross Myers at Alan A. Myers was another one of those leaders who told his peer group, we need to do more. Sally's had some remarkable success with contractors that merged the two. But a year ago, committed to holistic safety. This year, unified in safety. And this year, craft workers will receive a field guide to mental health resources. We have merged mental and physical. And Brent, your book, that first version way back in the early 2000s, the people-profit connection, you were sharing with people. Mine was human capital risk management. Yours was taking care of people. Fatigue, nutrition, hydration, emotional intelligence, conflict management, communication. It's taken all of our parts to make this come together.
Which I still have to get that book, by the way. I still have to read. You said something. So with National Safety Week, right? This is a really good segue to, I think, something that is really important that we spoke about last week, Cal. Sally's event. This is the first time that the initiatives and the conversations have expanded beyond the local stage to the national stage. So I think that is a huge milestone that we need to talk about.
Yeah, we're all like thrilled. It just became very obvious that there was all this pockets of activity, good things happening with unions, good things happening with professional associations, good things happening with contractors, but they were all happening in silos or side conversations. And it was like this moment in the movement where we just had to pull everybody together, share the lessons learned, and then cast a united vision of how we're going to move forward together. So I don't know, Cal, back in October, November of last year, I'm like, wouldn't it be great if we got, 50 people around a table and shared what we learned? And Cal's like, sure. And then he 10x'd it in like a second. And now it's like this full on summit. Like I'm warning all of you, you get Cal involved and it's going to be 10x'd in a second. So now we have a 2-day summit in Denver, May 17th and 18th. The first day is a train the trainer, because one of the issues that we have now is we got to build capacity within the industry so that people can run these things on their own. So we're doing a train the trainer certification course. And then the second day, man, we can't even squeeze a thin mint in it. It is packed. We've got Cal and Brent are both keynoting. All right. So the Three Musketeers will continue. But then we're also bringing in really the OG, right? If we're really honest, Jørgen Glustrup, who's been at this for 20, 30 years in Australia, and has moved the movement internationally with real return on investment studies and all kinds of really important work. And so we're all a little giddy about bringing Jørgen to the United States and he's so humble. He's a Danish man from Australia. He's like, I'm no tall poppy. I'm just a plumber. I'm like, you're a plumber who changed the world. Now, come on, get on stage. But he's great. And then we're going to do a couple of panels with executives about, from their perspective, how does this fit into their business strategy, from peer support groups that have been up and running. And then we're going to have some roundtable discussions. What have we learned? Where are we headed? And mostly, I'm just super excited to get people around a table together and meet each other and really solidify these networks that have been pretty game changing from where I sit. I want them all to meet each other. Yeah, it's been great. and we're looking at selling out. We're hoping like 200 people, and we have enough momentum to make this an annual event.
I think it's heading that way just from seeing the conversations. Yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait to see you all there because I'm going to be there. So it's amazing that that milestone has been achieved. And
before you go on, I want to make sure everybody knows you're not just going to be there. You're going to be adding value to the whole experience. We're going to be recording a lot of the conversations, and our hope is that we have a white paper coming out of it that captures all of the knowledge that we are discussing. I know. So it's going to go on. And thanks for giving it legs beyond just the meeting.
Awesome. That's see, and it's so funny, all the efforts that have led up to it, you've reached this milestone. It feels really intimidating. You feel like, oh, this is all new. No, it's not new. You got decades of conversations that are going to be feeding this thing. So all of those tough conversations that were had are going to lead us into real results, and which is a good segue into something I wanted to ask about you, Cal. When we started these conversations, we were really only dealing with symptoms, and I'm sure Sally and Brent, you guys could probably validate this. It felt like we were just dealing with symptoms, and I truly believe that we're getting to the point now where we're actually identifying root causes. And that's where I think, Cal, you can help with this conversation.
Yeah, this has been my passion for my whole career. I've been in the insurance industry, except for that 7.5 years I worked for that amazing contractor that allowed me to make this part of our safety and risk culture. I've always been in the workers' compensation arena. Mm-hmm. I came to work for Holmes Murphy because they are an employee benefits company as well. And I saw the opportunity to impact tens to hundreds of thousands of lives in a year by changing the way people conceive employee benefits with respect to substance use disorders, with respect to opioids as two areas. But the path I've been on for many years has been around musculoskeletal injury. If we can prevent the soft tissue injuries, we can avoid chronic pain, we can avoid that first dose of opioids. We can minimize the impact of sleep deprivation. We can reduce fatigue, which will reduce what we now call presenteeism. Years ago, the HR directors, and we have some on the line today, I'm happy to see, they were right when they talked about employees being disengaged. And sometimes we were thinking it was because they weren't satisfied at work, but I honestly believe in our industry, and we see it, Sally, in other high-risk industries, it is this pain that is nagging, that numbs you, leads to some self-medication in the case of a relatively high percentage of people, and you'll find evidence of that. And so that's been my part of this journey, and it's why I always stay a little bit behind. Brent, I love what you've done from your programs. I'm the guy hanging around looking for the person with a limp on a job site who maybe hasn't spoken to someone. I'm the person who was there talking to families about the side effects of surgery and opioids and side effects. And I know I made HR very nervous, but talking to people to say, have you found a different doctor? Like, you can be your own advocate. You can take care of yourself. I have a lot of those micro conversations. And Sally, I think even in the early days, you saw something I didn't anticipate. I got myself doing more of that crisis response than I ever expected to. And I had to become really clear. Do not call me if you are in a crisis. We need to direct you to those behavioral health people. But those are the areas where my passion lies. Those are the root causes that, if left unresolved, can contribute to increased suicide risk. And then folks like Sally understand that connection between loneliness, isolation, the family pressures. I know that we have more sensitivity today about DUIs and divorce and custody disputes. Those have been three areas when I hear about individuals. Those are pain points, and people accelerate quickly or deteriorate quickly is probably the right word. And we try to put a safety net around those individuals. And we need more observers, we need more helpers, we need more empathy in the workplace so people know they can talk about these things.
So, so more observers, more empathy. You brought up a very good point, the behavioral awareness, being in close proximity of people, which remote work is really interrupting. So being in close proximity with people where you develop that behavioral awareness so you can see when they're off. And Olga thing, and that's actually one thing that we really promote on our team. We stay really close to each other for that purpose. Now, Sally, I wanted to ask you about preventative controls that we put in place, because what Cal mentioned was more, being cognitively aware of your teammates, helping intervene, and being self-aware so you can intervene on yourself. But from a preventative perspective, what can you recommend that would be simple for people, or simpler for people to bring to their teams?
Yeah, so of course, on a longer session, we could talk very deeply about some of the strategic levers that need to be pulled and kind of the long-term, sustainable, comprehensive strategy. But I also want to make sure that people walk away with a couple of, oh yeah, I could start that tomorrow, and good action steps that they can take that make a difference. So the whole theme of this roundtable is, how do we bake this work into holistic health and safety, right? Mm-hmm. So in doing that, we know that a big piece of this is how we shift that culture where they're not separate, they're together. And you do that by a lot of small action steps that line up over time. So I've been real inspired by some of the contractors that we have been working with on how they're doing this, and in a way that really aligns with the practices that are already going on in safety. So obviously toolbox talks have been around for forever. It is an expected ritual, daily, small doses of information regularly applied over time. So how do we apply that here? A number of ways. You can create toolbox talks around what we call mental health literacy. Today, we're just going to talk about this little narrow issue around, say, anxiety. Okay, what does anxiety mean? You don't have to get clinical about it. How does it show up in your body? What is it about? Why is it for there? And then here's a regulation tool that you can practice or teach your loved one about if you're worried about your kid or your partner. So these little tiny micro doses of awareness, self-reflection, and coping strategies can be applied in toolbox talks in terms of safety moments, putting together little micro videos, micro learning videos, dripping it in. The other thing that I saw that was really inspiring is the Graham Construction in particular is doing this thing called the morale score. So once a month, the superintendent will walk around and get a morale score, first checking in on themselves. How's my morale this month? Is it, up, down, where are we at? And then with their crew and with their trade partners. That superintendent then reports that morale score up to the leader. And if the leader starts to see some trends, upward, downward, they immediately proactively go in and say, how can you help? How can I help? What do you need here? Another innovative tool that I've seen is what we call the pulse check. So similarly, once a quarter or so, what's the best thing in your world right now? Who deserves a high five? What's the biggest challenge or stressor that you're facing? Do you have the tools and resources you need to be successful here? And how can the manager best support you? Whatever, some kind of questions in that framework takes the person less than 5 minutes to answer. Really good data that we can track over time. So you can see, are there certain parts of the organizations that are thriving or not, or tanking or whatever, and we can start to in real time respond to those needs. I've even seen some companies work all of this up into a global or divisional well-being score that they're tracking over time, and recognizing and rewarding the crews or the teams that are trending up, and not punishing the ones that are not, but as an early intervention, going in and saying, okay, what do you need? How do we help? All kinds of really cool stuff coming into play that is really a lot about small action steps that change things in a large way over time. And not too unfamiliar from what Brent's been doing for decades about how do we drive emotional intelligence for individuals, but also for teams.
There was a lot to unpack there. I was trying to take notes. I'm like, man, how am I going to get all this in the recap? That's awesome. Thank God it's recorded. Matt, you bang on. It sounds like you've actually worked with some organizations that have taken that direction and measuring successfully, keyword successfully, which is awesome. I haven't personally seen that before yet. We do a very similar focus check where we look for patterns, but we don't track it. And now I'm reconsidering the fact that we don't track it. Brent.
Well, what's important in the tracking piece, I was just gonna say, what's important in any kind of tracking piece around mental health and well-being is that people feel like their privacy is protected, because otherwise they won't be honest. I just wanted to throw that in there. People get a little squirrely when you're tracking my health data, and this can be connected to that.
Very good point. Very good point. Yeah, Brent, I think this is a real good time for you to come in, because
they're doing such good things and simple things. They're not easy, but they're certainly simple. The foundation I work from normally is the emotional intelligence and physical. So we have an emotional intelligence test and a physical symptom survey that we use, and we correlate the emotional and the physical, and they always correlate. And when you look at the typical emotional profile for like 50 superintendents, you can see a hint of suicide and mental health issues in there, because they've got really high independence, really high assertiveness, but lower emotional self-awareness, lower emotional expression. They're not saying what they're feeling, lower empathy skills, lower interpersonal relationship skills, lower social responsibility, the team stuff and the group stuff. So they're the drivers, they get things done. We love them. They're awesome people. And yet, couple that with maybe also lower impulse control. I mean, think about those dynamics in their emotional profile that relate to mental health and mental wellness. When you couple that with that hypermasculine work environment, can't be vulnerable, can't ask for help, it makes sense that we're seeing what we're seeing. And then when you throw in the physical survey on top of that and correlate those, we see a lot of burnout cropping up, a lot of parasympathetic and sympathetic dominance, wired and tired kind of an attitude, physically, plus adrenals are getting fried. So we try to address both. We'll look at, okay, how do we connect people more as humans? And then how do we address these physical things with nutrition and sleep and exercise and those kinds of things? And by the way, as far as resources go, everybody, if you put in, it's brentdarnell.com/resources, there's an emotional intelligence and physical symptom survey test there. It's called the Geist EI test and symptom survey. Take that, see where you are. It automatically graphs, it automatically tells you what profiles it sees, what body systems it sees that are under duress. There's also a toolbox safety topics in there that have to do with human connection and relationships. So it's 52 ways to connect people as humans. That's a cool thing that, again, you can just download them and you have it. There's another thing called the body battery inventory, which measures stressors versus recovery stuff, and it gives you a score. And if your score is negative, you either need to build in more recovery stuff or reduce some of your stressors. So that's kind of a cool tool that we use as well. But that's where we start. It's emotional, it's physical. And then where are you in those two spaces? And then what can we help you work on to be better in that emotional space, to be better physically, and to talk about all these topics, of nutrition and stress and sleep and exercise, and get them talking about it. And by the way, since we have such a small group, I would love to give my book, The People Profit Connection, to everybody as well. So if you go to brentdarnell.com/people profit, all one word, lowercase, you can download The People Profit Connection, the 4th edition as well.
Awesome. Dana, Bianca, have you guys at your companies have you had any tactics implemented that would help in this recording?
Not beyond what we've already talked about. We've done toolbox talks, but we haven't really made progress beyond that yet.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's progress, comparatively speaking. Awesome. Now, So Brent, have you, when you mentioned, the ways to connect, actually, this question is for anybody. Have you noticed an increase in the complexity of connection with so many companies moving to remote and hybrid work?
The things I talk about is human connection is more important now than it's ever been. And we have to find ways to connect. And, Zoom calls and Microsoft Teams calls are a poor substitute, but they do serve some kind of purpose of connection. And I think we just need to, as we move out of the pandemic, we need to keep those connections alive, however we need to. I mean, a lot of guys I work with, they're field guys. I worked with a group of 21 paint superintendents yesterday. They're all in the field. They are starved for this discussion. They are starved for human connection and relationship and communication and shared experience. And we're all struggling with the same stuff. That's what everybody said yesterday. Wow, we're all kind of struggling with the same stuff. Yeah, that's a cool realization. Now they can call that guy and say, man, I don't know what to do. And they will help each other. But we have to make those connections first. And that's where this is. But for now, Zoom is Zoom and isolation is isolation. And we just need to utilize whatever is before us to connect. That's my word for 2022 is connection. Every way you can connect with people, connect with people.
So
It
then,
takes an intentional strategy, Brent, for companies to cascade regular, reassuring communications. And those check-ins, Sally gave a couple of really good examples. That pulse survey, I think, does work. It can be pretty easily administered, but you can see then those trend lines. But there's nothing like that old-fashioned management by walking around or leadership by walking around and being with your people, showing up. I kind of think the antidote for presenteeism is being present and being with your people and finding those pathways to connection. I've been seeing more companies delay all employee meetings and doing them at the division or crew level and just building in some time for people to get back together. And as we integrate back into the offices, I'm seeing that celebration as well. Celebrate being back together. And it's been fun to be part of a lot of those meetings lately.
So you brought up
the other, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Well, the other trend that I'm seeing that I think speaks to this point is, over the last couple of years, employee resource groups or different, affinity groups have been popping up, right, as a very important part of helping people find safe connections of people with similar identities or experiences or whatever. And now I'm seeing how those conversations are syncing up to the mental health conversations and how it's really about creating safe space where people can express vulnerabilities, connect with each other through shared meaningful experiences, and feel psychologically safer at work. So the ERGs or the business resource groups or whatever people call them have really been a springboard for this larger well-being conversation of how do we have people feel safe at work, basically. I also wanted to, before you move on, because I didn't want to forget, I also have a free book to give to this small group that we just put together. It's called 10 mistakes to avoid when developing a mental health program, because I see the same mistakes that companies do out of the gate over and over and over again. And so how do we circumvent some of those mistakes? Yeah, peer groups. Peer groups are also really an important way that people can gather together around different topics. I know there's member assistance programs that are out there now. Some of them are focused on addiction recovery at work, which is amazing because a peer group is often free and easily accessible and certainly a great augment to any kind of treatment people are getting. So all kinds of really cool ways of people connecting are coming through.
You can bring a lot of what the industry's focused on into these discussions on mental health, like lean. The two pillars of lean are continual improvement and respect for people. So it's about respecting our people and taking care of them. And then the other thing is diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, those kinds of discussions really just dovetail right into this thing about mental health and safe spaces and people being respected and people connecting with each other in a human way and not in a superficial kind of way. So all of those discussions can just really go right into everything that we're trying to accomplish.
You're starting
I would
to
also
see
say that
those baked in at the association level,
Yeah.
at the apprenticeship level. Pre-apprenticeship programs are embracing this, so it's a whole workforce development. Sally, it's not unlike what we envisioned years ago, teaching people how to bake this into each of those elements of culture. I want to just share with folks, in case you're not aware, but in New England, recovery resources on the Massachusetts Building and Trades Council website. I know we have some non-union contractors, but that's 90,000 workers have info at their fingertips. Recovery Week is occurring next week, the Building Trades Employers Association. And they're doing that this year in conjunction with the New York BTEA. So that whole corridor is becoming this hotbed of substance misuse, treatment, and recovery. And the next phase that we will see in our industry out of each of those areas Brent just talked about will be recovery-friendly workplaces. 32 states currently have recovery-friendly workplace movement afoot. And it'll take time to latch, but I was speaking to a friend yesterday. She said in New Hampshire, there are 300 certified recovery-friendly workplaces. 90,000 employees are under that umbrella. And that's what gives me hope, because I see firsthand the ramifications of untreated substance misuse and on the opioid side. And here's the last thing I'd like to say. Sally, it was weird when we did the media saturation campaign I told you I could do, but we could talk about suicide prevention 3 years before we could talk about mental health, 5 years before we could write about substance misuse. That shows you how deep and steep that hole is and the climb is going to be. And there's a lot of work to be done, but I wanted to share that's where I'm leaning into and seeing great signs of hope and progress.
Cal, how many companies did you say have invested into that recovery space?
So that just was New Hampshire. The publication is called Journey, and it is for persons in long-term recovery.
Okay.
And her name is Carolyn Delaney, and Carolyn shared in New Hampshire, there's over 300 certified recovery-friendly workplaces.
It's so interesting how we treated that in the past. And by the way, before I get into that comment, I have to give a shout out to Sasha Reed for all the work she's done through CPC on diversity inclusion.
Yeah.
That's been a really great discussion, and she is awesome. But think about it, how we treat people that have addiction problems. We shun them, we banish them, we embarrass them, we just kick them out and say you're not welcome back, instead of, gosh, how can we help you? We want to get you through this. Here's some recovery stuff. And it's crazy that we're like banishing the people that we need to come into this industry and help them and help them be productive and help them turn their lives around.
Yeah, fewer than 10% of people get help, but we have a slippery slope too, right? I'm a risk and safety professional. For years, we helped people institute drug testing programs. We've been telling people drug testing programs are not enough, but what's concerning is we kick a lot of people to the curb. There needs to be intermediate steps beyond a last chance agreement. Maybe someone needs a second or third chance. And Sally, this year, Brent, was featured as a ENR top 25 newsmaker. One of the people that she was feeded with was a guy named Dave Argus. He's in South Boston. His company hires individuals in long-term recovery, teaches them construction. 22 crew members last year at peak. And people said, Cal, isn't he worried about liability? What about his workers' compensation? And I go, I'd love to give you his phone number, have that call with him. Because Dave will say, those are the people I'm least worried about. They're the people who look out for one another, who are on top of it, and they've disclosed their issues. It's the people who haven't yet disclosed their issues I'm concerned about. And then he does like a little mic drop because he knows he's right.
So I think the barriers and the problem is even worse, and the challenges are going to be even worse for other reasons. And I think for the sake of the recording, we should probably get this discussion out. Brent, you said you were talking with the guys in the field who are in close proximity to each other and have access to each other, but they're starving for the conversations. Cal, I'm with you. Proximity is important. It's about coming together and all that. But then you mentioned, you spoke with these guys at the crew level. Critical. What we don't see is the leaders stepping up to the table, because if you listen to this conversation, you hear things like getting together. The guys are in the field, but they're not talking. Baked in processes. All of these equate to two things: time and money that the leaders and the owners aren't willing to give up. So I think the biggest barrier is convincing the owners and the leaders, who sometimes are backed by venture capitalists and shareholders who do not look at the big picture. They look at the very short-sighted quarterly profit picture, and quarterly profits are prioritized often over the long-term vision of a well-balanced team. So a team that is excelling in not only performance, but positivity and physical and mental health. So in my opinion, with so many companies being backed by venture capital that prioritizes quarterly profits, how do we get them over this to actually invest into the long term? That's, I think, is the elephant in the room. Sally?
I think we got it. So I'm going to be presenting at the Construction Industry Roundtable next week, which is all the CEOs of the large companies. And I said, what's your biggest pain point? What is your biggest pain point? And they said, war for talent. It is the churn of our younger workforce in particular. We're having a hard time recruiting young talent out of college, having a hard time keeping them. It is a war on talent, and that's going to make or break us. And I said, and I also got just a chance to present to two emerging CEO groups, so young leaders. And I said, what's the thing you want to tell your industry? And they said, get over this mental health thing and don't be afraid, because they're all, they grew up with it. They're fluent in it. They see it as a priority. And they're like, you need to get out of your own way on this. Help us help you, and they were just brilliant. Right. I said, Sally, how do we talk to these, 50 something, 60 somethings about this? And I said, you lead them. You lead them, because you're the key on helping them be successful, because you're going to help them communicate how they're going to differentiate. Here's how we're better. Here's how we're a good place to work. Here's how we have a culture of care. Here's how we're going to take care of all of you, not just the productive side of you, but your family, your well-being, all of that. And so it's a really exciting time. I think one of the ways we also get through that, in addition to the younger generation workforce educating the older one, is that when we see a couple of senior leaders who have lived experience, who are brave enough to say, here's why I care about this. Here's why this conversation matters to me. Here's how it's shown up in my life personally. Then the other leaders start to follow suit, because it just takes a couple of very brave people to put themselves out there with that level of courage for other people to start to see the impact and the ripple effects. And then all of a sudden you start to see this domino effect happening, where more and more leaders are stepping into that space and understanding that this is a human issue. Almost everybody has had some form of this show up in their lives. And when we can be clean about that, we realize we're all in the same boat together. We can help each other out. So we absolutely need more courageous leaders stepping into this and leading it.
But Sally, it's an avalanche of leaders compared to what it was 5, 6, 7 years ago.
True. Very much so.
Yes.
True.
There's a company I reference in my book called Chenbro. And they've estimated for every dollar they put into wellness and well-being and those kinds of initiatives, they get about a $3.50 return for each dollar they put in.
Wow.
So that's, and they just started because they cared about their people, but they didn't realize that, because they saw escalating insurance costs and healthcare costs. And so theirs, instead of like doing the hockey stick, theirs just kind of leveled off. You know, it's gotten a little flatter because of these programs that they've implemented.
Hey, Cal, I know you have to go, so I just want to say thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Cal. We're going to continue this. Yeah.
Thank you for understanding. I apologize.
Thank you, Cal.
See
Can't
you,
wait to
Cal.
see you.
See you soon. Bye, Brent. See you,
See ya.
Chad.
Bye.
Thanks
You got it.
everyone for joining.
Awesome.
Yay.
So three
Oh.
$3.50 return.
At least. And I think that's just like from like medical costs, not even looking at all the other hidden costs that sometimes show up in other places.
Sure.
You know, how much it costs to recruit a new employee who's left because they were pushed out or whatever. At least 3.5. I think Australia found $4.28 or something return on investment. But again, most of that was just medical costs around treatment, not even all the upstream prevention work that we can make a difference on. So
Right.
we need
And
better
longevity.
and more return on investment. So yeah, exactly.
Longevity,
Right,
disability. I mean, you're
Exactly.
preventing a lot of those
Legal
sort
costs.
of long-term. Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm. So the other kind of futuristic thing, going back to your leadership, how do we get them engaged?
Yep.
What I'm seeing in maybe 5 years from now is that we're going to have a national certification program, like LEED certification, where people are going to be asked, companies are going to be asked, what level of certification do you have around, we're calling it HOPE certification. We're piloting it now in a number of places, but what HOPE, how are you, is your company HOPE certified? At what level are you HOPE certified? And it's all these best practice strategies on how to, improve your organization's capacity to have your workforce thrive. So it's upstream, midstream, downstream, and it's really exciting because then we'll have like third-party verification. It's not just you tooting your horn. We've got third-party verification. Have you done these things? What are your metrics? And then they can say in the procurement process, we're whatever. This is still baby steps, but we're like at this level of being HOPE certified. Well, that tells me something. It tells me you've invested in this. Somebody's looked over your shoulder, looked at what the impacts are, and so on. So I see that coming in a really cool way moving forward. We've got a 15-minute warning.
Yep. That's
Bye,
amazing.
Dana. So good to see you again.
That's the first time I've ever heard about anything like that being done, which is amazing.
Yeah,
and
it's very
speaking
exciting.
about the war on talent, that of all the certifications out there, and the country's best employer and all that stuff, people have lost faith in those. This I see getting some serious traction.
Yep. Very exciting.
Brent, so how is okay, you gave some resources on things that companies could do to track metrics and implement. Just for the listeners though, what would be your top 2 things that you would implement, like takeaways that would be boom, something that they could do literally tomorrow?
I would say have your project team or your internal team take that Geist EI test and symptom survey and talk about the results. I mean, it's not like a validated scientific instrument, but it's pretty good, and it'll get the discussion going. And if you got like half your team and burnout is showing up in the top couple of profiles that it sees, we need to have some deeper discussions. And also, I don't know if I mentioned this, but in that same resources page, there's something called the Tough Guy Survival Kit. And there's a whole chapter there on stress management and peak performance. And it teaches basic meditation techniques, basic breathing techniques, basic mindfulness techniques. It tells, talks about sleep and nutrition and all of those things we know we're supposed to be doing. There's another great book I'm finishing now called How Emotions Are Made, that these neuroscientists are finding really compelling evidence, research-based stuff about the mind-body connection.
Right.
And so that's becoming more and more, not just woo-woo stuff, but verified by pretty rigorous research and people really figuring out what's really going on here and how can we apply this to things like wellness and mental health and productivity and performance. So
Using the body to impact the brain to impact the body, and again, making sure that the proper peptides are released, you're feeling certain emotions at the right. Yeah.
Yes. And we're sort of fighting against Western medicine that gets really specialized. And we like to have, like, I just do the pancreas. I don't do anything else,
Yeah.
but that integrated physical, emotional, mental, that whole thing that's integrated is really a powerful approach to health and well-being. And a lot of really smart doctors and researchers and people at Harvard and all of these medical, Johns Hopkins, they're really looking at things like meditation and how that impacts you on a genetic level. Regular meditation can prevent genes from expressing. So if you have a propensity toward a disease, you may prevent that gene from expressing by doing all these things that we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
It saved my well-being during the pandemic. I developed a meditation practice, and I'm religious about it every morning. And my anxiety was through the roof at the beginning, as many people were, and that just saved me, so I could focus and keep going forward. I think my answer would align very much with what Brent said, which is start by listening. And so you can listen through a survey. You can listen in small group discussions. You can listen through one-on-one interviews, but I think when people see the urgency around this, right, we're talking about overdose and addiction and suicide, that, not big numbers in our industry, like people feel the urgency and they want to go right into action. They want to take a training off a shelf and drop it in and check a box, or, whatever. They're reacting. But there's a different thing that happens when you enroll and engage your workforce in co-designing the strategy. And so when you feed back, Brent's survey and say, 70% of our workforce is experiencing burnout. 40% are not getting more than 6 hours sleep a night. This is us. It's not some national trend. This is our family. And then I would also have that qualitative part, the qualitative and quantitative work really nicely together, because sometimes you might not always understand what the data is actually trying to tell you. So have those small group discussions, have those interviews, and understand what this means to that community, because sometimes they'll surprise you. We do this all the time when we're partnering with organizations. We'll look at the data and we'll say, wow, they're very stressed. What's the root cause of that stress? And sometimes it's things like, we don't have any windows in our part of the building.
That's so
seriously
true.
This came up as a finding. We don't have any windows in our part of the building, and so we're feeling stifled and depressed all day. Boom, windows, problem solved, right? It wasn't get more counselors. It was, we could use some natural light over here, and so they made some windows and the people felt better. So the root causes will emerge in those conversations, and sometimes the solutions are incredibly creative and to take away all kinds of distress that counseling all day is not going to solve.
So how did they come to the realization that it was the windows? Was that just a group with no experts involved? It was actually just the information coming out through the survey and discussions, and then reviewing.
So the survey revealed that in this particular organization that people weren't thriving. There was a lot of stress and burnout. And when we got to what are the components that's driving that distress and despair, the windows was one. There were many other things. There was some discrimination and bias happening. Again, counseling all day is not going to solve that problem. There was some status pieces, different types of contractors, different types of workers in there that were causing division. I mean, again, these are systems issues, not necessarily get your people to counseling. I mean, getting people to counseling was already happening, and that actually wasn't a problem. The stigma issue wasn't a problem in this organization. There was a lot other deeper root causes that we needed to look at, systems fixes.
So
fascinating.
I mean, like who was doing the interpretation? I guess the reason I'm asking is, organizations that go out, is there a risk of them doing this themselves without experts coming in?
Yeah.
And
no, I think a third party, I got no skin in the game. I don't know the politics. I'm coming in like an alien to see what comes up here, is very helpful to kind of put those pieces together. And when you're swimming in your own fishbowl, you don't notice stuff. But when you have someone who comes in with fresh eyes and says, oh, it's very clear to me. I look at your lunchroom, right? This is another environmental scan piece. I look at your lunchroom and I can tell you a lot about what's happening interpersonally with people here. Who's sitting together? Who's sitting alone? How engaged are the conversations? How quickly are people moving in and out, or are they enjoying each other's company? You can pick up a lot when you're an outsider coming in, just looking at things that people forget to notice because you just see it every day, kind of thing. Yeah.
Man, so go ahead, Fred.
Kelly had a great question. What have you found to be the most effective way to gather honest feedback from individuals? So here, let me just tell you an example of what happened yesterday with these 21 painting superintendents of various ages. I started with a slide of my dad on a project in 1965. I was 6 years old. And I said, this is how I got into the business. I grew up in it. And I told him a little bit about my dad and his background, and said, I love this business. I grew up in it. It was magic for me. So then we just went around the room and how did you get into business? And people started sharing all kinds of stuff. Like my dad was really strict and he was in the military and he wanted me to do such and such. And then this next guy says, I'm a meth addict. And part of my recovery is I've got to find a way to make money for my wife and 2 kids. And this was a great move for me because I like the work, I like the people. So people start sharing all these things just on a real simple storytelling exercise of how did you get in this business? It creates trust, it creates vulnerability, and people started sharing all kinds of things like, I'm really struggling. I'm overwhelmed. I feel like I can't. I don't sleep well at night. I get 3 hours of sleep a night, and we had a discussion about sleep and how do we get better sleep. And people just start opening up. But it starts with a simple thing like, how did you get in the business? This is my dad, or something like. Here's another great exercise I've used before is tell us about as a child something you overcame as a child and how you overcame some difficulty. See, and that puts them in the role of hero in hero's journey, and it doesn't feel as vulnerable. They feel like they're saying something that makes them feel powerful and makes them feel like a hero, that they overcame this difficult thing in their childhood. And then, boy, that starts opening up, and then all kinds of things start happening. But storytelling is a really cool way to do it. And if people aren't used to storytelling, here's an easy way to get into a real good storytelling like vibe. Get people paired up and tell them to tell the story of their name. First name, middle name, last name. Tell us how you got your name. And even that leads to vulnerability, family stuff, all kinds of cool things crop up just in that little simple exercise. And that's a totally non-threatening exercise.
That's great.
So it's going gradually and getting people opening up about things that they're willing to open up about. And then you'd be amazed at where that leads.
So now then I got to ask, this is the can of worms here. So we've got the storytelling, which is a phenomenal tactic to just get people to open up. We have Sally, the third-party observer, who is not in the fishbowl, who has a higher level of observational skills and expertise that can help dissect what's really going on. Does the third-party observer interrupt the honesty of the conversation?
I don't know. Here's the way I do it is I let it unfold.
Yep.
And if it's something that needs to be addressed, you got to address it, because otherwise people are thinking about that the rest of the day. But I found that creates such a safe space that if an intervention needs to be had, it's welcome, it's accepted, it's honored. Like, so if I observe something that needs to be said based on what they're telling me, they trust me, they trust each other. So those conversations can take place. And if it's an observation that's valid, they'll say, well, okay, let's talk more about that.
Yeah.
So I think it's about knowing, and that's where the beauty of Sally and her training comes in. I'm a trained facilitator. To me, that's just a facilitation thing. But for Sally, it probably goes much deeper and to counseling and psychology and things like that. I'm not that. I'm not that guy. So I have to just kind of tread lightly and intervene when I feel comfortable doing it.
Yeah, I think some of the things that have worked in our favor in getting really good information in that space are just some research protocols that really protect human rights of human research subjects. So there's a whole bunch of things we do: informed consent, de-identifying data. You know, we put all the parameters in place to say your privacy protection, number one. And so you don't have to answer questions you don't want to. When we record the data, we separate out leaders from non-leaders in this work. So the leaders get their own thing. They're recorded as I'm person number one, and this is what I'm saying. And there's no way to trace back who said what to an actual person. So we create a lot of rules and processes so that people, again, can feel safe to share the real deal.
Right.
And sometimes they'll be quiet through the entire small group discussion. And then when it's over, they'll pull us in the hallway. Here's what I wanted to say, now that I know what your questions were. So it's really important that people feel protected.
Yeah, I've had that before as well. They'll pull you aside after, but also we do the same thing. Anybody that doesn't want to participate, you just say pass. And we honor that, and there's no retribution, there's no nothing. It's just whatever comfort level you have. And I encourage them to push the comfort level, but we don't want to push them past the point that they're not, really comfortable, and it gets really dicey. But you know what? I've found that very few of these folks pass. They're so hungry for this discussion. I've had one in hundreds of people pass for this.
Wow. Okay. And I imagine even the ones that do, Sally, back to one of your original comments on small doses, lots of reps over time, those small doses, that micro dosing of conversations, it builds up their courage anyways.
Who said microdosing? You guys are talking about microdosing? Oh man. I was in the wrong room.
Sally actually did say microdosing.
Chad, take it away. What'd you guys talk about?
Oh man, it was awesome. It was an awesome chat, and it was great to see everybody again. So we had Cal, the super connector of the movement, and Brent, the key master, I like to call him, because he's just the man of measurement. And then Dr. Sally Spencer-Thomas, who, man, thank you. You contributed so much to the conversation. It was an honor to have you. So as always, I highly recommend everybody go back and watch it, because one of the biggest issues that we've been seeing in the industry is that despite all the efforts that have been done, well, when you talk to this group over decades, but despite all of the efforts to normalize the conversation, it's starting to feel like we've succeeded in normalizing the conversation. Sally herself, we've got she's spearheading the mental health summit in Denver in about 4 weeks, I believe it is. Nathan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or if you have information to bring up on that to show on the screen, that would be great. What this represents is it is a major milestone, is the first time that the conversation, or the normalization of the conversations around mental health and suicide prevention, have reached the national stage. So these efforts have resulted in a tremendous results in normalizing the conversations. However, the problem is the industry is still seeing physical health and mental health as completely separate on the job site, when in fact they are one. There is a very important brain-body relationship at play here, and all of the experts in the industry agree that if we focus on uniting physical and mental health as one and prioritize that over profits, we will improve our ability to build better teams and better lifestyles all around. And we really dug deep into why this is happening, what major barriers are stopping us from succeeding in that mission. And Sally and Brent gave very specific tactics that people can implement at their organizations right away.